In the third section of this first piece, we're also going to consider the cultural and historical context. This is an essential part of the course because it really considers the culture, the background, the creation, why a text is how it is, how it became that way. And a huge part of the IB in fitting that profile of being a critical thinker, being cultural, thinking outside the box. So for the IB, the cultural and historical context play a big part. The first objective of this first section, this cultural historical context, is to understand the socio-political backdrop of text. This first objective is to really consider how literature reflects the social and political realities of the time in which it was written. All the texts that we read provide a huge insight into the historical context that they were written in, the histories that affected them, why they became that way, or the events that led up to the creation of that literature influenced the literature. By understanding this socio-political backdrop, by analysing it, we will gain a much deeper appreciation into the themes and the messages conveyed in the literature. The socio-political context profoundly influences all the aspects of a literature. If you consider many of the books that you've read and consider the history that led up to them being written, you can really begin to gain an understanding of how that history influenced and created that literature. It's really interesting. So we will examine how those historical events, how those social movements, political ideologies, and so on, all shape the narrative presented in the text. And by learning to contextualize the literary works within this social-political milieu, we will uncover layers and layers of meaning and really gain a deeper understanding into the author's intentions, but also into the author's subcontext. As like, well, were they aware that the history up until then, or the history that the author themselves had experienced, influenced the way that they were writing? The second objective is closely linked of how the historical events shape the literary themes and characters. So we'll consider how the historical events going way back influenced the experiences and perspectives of individuals. And this is not just the author writing, it's also you, readers, me as a teacher. How do other events we're exposed to influence our perspectives on the text? It really allows the history to really shape the narrative of a text and to shape perspectives of us reading the text and the author writing the text. And so by analysing this impact, we will really gain insight into the ways in which history informs storytelling and the way that history shapes our perceptions of a story. They serve as catalysts for literary exploration. If we can go back, consider recent history, far history, and consider those in our analysis, it shows a level of critical thinking that the IB are looking for in can we address that history and consider how it's affected the present or the book that we're reading. The history often provides a backdrop against the characters also, like the influence of the characters and how the characters became those kind of people. We will explore various aspects of history, some larger than others. So we will explore wars, revolutions, social movements, to really address how they shape themes and characters and plot lines of the literature that we're looking at. By doing so, we will uncover how these connections between past events and contemporary issues are explored in literature. The third objective is to investigate how cultural norms influence narrative perspectives. Again, these areas become very, very societal, addressing all parts of culture, society, history, to address how they have become and influenced us or the author. Cultural norms in this case play a significant role in shaping a narrative perspective, in that different cultures obviously have very distinct worldviews and values, which truly influence the way stories are told and interpreted. So we could read the same book and have very differing opinions on the book because of the culture that we come from. By investigating how these cultural norms influence the narrative perspectives, we will develop a much deeper understanding of cultural diversity in literature and how this shapes the lens through which stories are perceived and understood. We will also consider how the cultural values, traditions, beliefs influence the portrayal of the characters that we're exposed to, the settings that the story takes place, the themes that occur in the literature, allowing us to consider a much more diverse cultural perspective to really broaden our understanding of human experience overall, and to consider the richness of cultural diversity in literature and how that cultural richness in itself allows a huge richness in the portrayal and understanding of a piece of literature. The fourth objective is to consider the significance of cultural diversity in literature. So, exploring the window into diverse cultures and experiences from around the world, we will examine works from different cultures and regions and explore how the cultural diversity in that area affects the literature that we're reading, allowing us to engage with it in more diverse manners and shape our understanding of it. This very much reflects the multifaceted nature of human existence, in that we can explore these different cultures, we can explore these different regions, ethnicities, and books from these regions, books from these ethnicities. As part of the IB, we have to read a translated text, for example. So we have to be exposed to these different cultures, and we'll explore how they illuminate the universal themes in books from across different cultures, but also the very unique themes specific to a culture or a language, allowing us to really embrace the cultural diversity in literature. And for me, I think to celebrate that diversity, because it makes every piece of literature unique to every person that reads it. The next aspect then is the impact of globalization on contemporary literature. So globalization has transformed literature across the world. It has facilitated the exchange of ideas and perspectives across different cultures. The only reason we can analyze the cultural diversity of these different literatures is because we now have access to them, where we maybe didn't before. And so we will discuss the impact of globalization on literature and consider how it's influenced these themes and these styles and these techniques of the authors and our perceptions of them. Globalization has allowed literature to spread across the world, and it has allowed easy access to literature. We no longer have to read just the literature from our country. The fact that we can read a translated text, or we can read a text that was written in Australia, in South Africa. We have access to English spoken texts from different cultures, but we also have access to different languages from around the world. And they have translated those texts and made them so that we can access and we can address them. So we will explore how the contemporary writers navigate these issues of globalization and the effects that this has had on their identity, on cultural hybridity in their texts, in their works. And by examining this, we will gain insight into the interconnectedness of culture and the evolving nature of literary expression. So it's super interesting points to get into to really analyze and address. The next aspect will be the role of historical movements in literary movement. So Romanticism, modernism, post-colonialism have all had profound impacts on literary movements, and we will analyze how these movements have shaped literary trends and influenced the works of writers across different time periods. These historical movements serve as ideological and artistic currents that shape literature and literary expression. So we'll explore these movements and these historical contexts to examine how authors responded to these social and political and cultural changes to really understand the influence of these historical movements on us, on society, on writers, and address how those literary styles and themes have evolved over time. Next aspect will be intersectionality, and which will explore the various social identities and how they intersect and influence individual experiences. Examples could be race or gender, cultural, historical, and sexuality, class intersections, to really consider how these influence identity and representation, again, among us as readers, but also as authors. It provides a framework into understanding the interconnectedness, again, of identity and experience. And we will examine how different character perspectives and interactions and experiences in literature are affected by these movements. We will consider how this intersectionality affects the text overall, and hopefully that will enable us to deepen our understanding of both power dynamics, privilege, marginalization within society. Which takes us then to the last section, Objective 8, to examine the representation of marginalized voices in literature. This really has the power to amplify marginalized voices. If you consider how certain marginalized sectors, such as sexuality, such as racism, how authors can really put a twist on that and open that up to the world and give their perspectives on it, give their views on it, give their thoughts on it as a whole, but also how they can teach, how through those ideas, through those experiences, they can open that up to the rest of the population. Literature, through this method, has the power to really amplify those voices, and it has the ability to challenge dominant narratives. Through the analyzation of marginalized groups, we ourselves can then gain insights into issues of power and privilege and social justice through the literature that we're exposed to. Often stories through these voices, given on, say, a first-person perspective or on experiences that many others with differing views are not exposed to. So the fact that these voices can share with the rest of us, it allows us to really understand the complexities of human experience. And then from here, we will explore how literature gives those voices to marginalized communities, voices, societies, to shed light on their struggles and their triumphs and their resilience. And we can also confront these issues of inequality and advocate for greater inclusivity and representation in literature that we read, allowing it to really grow, expand, and share. Perfect. That is the end of this first section. The next video will move on to the section of assessment, which I look forward to going through with you. Thank you.